Hello and welcome. This is Innovative Cities. I'm Israel Banks. I interview people who are either architects, community leaders, developers, or planners, or anyone who want to revive our cities and build a better future for our children and the next generations. Today, I have with me Hans Breaux. He's the founder of Project Co-op. Hans have a bachelor's degree in architecture and a master's degree in architecture from University of Louisiana. He is a sustainability guru. He has a lot of interest, and not just interest, he has modified his lifestyle to be super sustainable. He's a passive house consultant. Other things, interesting things about Hans, he meditates and he volunteers his time with Friends of Feral Felines. This is a cats rescuing program, and marine mammals of Maine, Portland, Maine, Bicycle and Pedestrians Advisory Committee. That's a lot of organization. The Bicycle Coalition of Maine, and sits on passivhausMAINE's board of directors. Wow, that's a lot of time invested in the community. Awesome, Hans. You want to tell us a bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Ezra. It's really great to be here. Yeah, I do. I was just telling a friend yesterday, I spend probably about as much time volunteering as I do working for a living. So I feel like the work I do, which I'm fortunate enough to be aligned with my convictions, allows me to do all that volunteer work. But yeah, I'm an architect in Portland, Maine. I really focus on sustainability issues and really want to be an agent of change when it comes to sustainable building. And I'm originally from Louisiana, and I got to Maine by walking here on the Appalachian Trail after grad school. So I do weird stuff like that. And Portland and the Northeast and New England is just a great place to focus on sustainability. A lot of people understand it. There's a lot of thought leadership here, and there are a lot of projects here that demonstrate, really successful sustainability goals. So I'm really fortunate to have landed here in a place where I have so many colleagues that I can learn from and also hopefully give back to. I think it's a unique place that is kind of just a hotbed of mixture of factors that allows it to be kind of, if you're interested in sustainability, like it's a great place to be, to learn and also do work. So yeah.
So tell us the original story. First, why architecture, and second, why sustainability? How did you get into the passive house, sustainability, and everything?
Sure. When I entered architecture school, like most architecture students, no idea what the practice is actually like. Just had some noble goals of like, oh, I want to save the world through affecting the built environment. Not really knowing how the built environment worked or how it came to be. And so it was a long path of changing that sort of initial desire, strong passion to influence the built environment in a positive way into what that could mean. And I didn't know what that would be early in my career. And so after arriving in Maine, I arrived shortly after the 2008 recession. So there actually wasn't a lot of work in architecture. So I actually worked at one of the largest cooperatives in Maine, the Belfast Co-op, and learned a lot about sort of cooperatives business models and how that all works. And that's how my current company is set up, as a worker cooperative, partially for that reason. But it was a lot of exposure to a lot of people who were participating in the Back to the Land movement, living off grid, all sorts of, what shall we call it, modified lifestyles to be more sustainable, and seeing what that was like, and seeing where I might professionally fit in to sort of help those who had already had that desire to live less impactful lives, and they're doing it here, and make it, allow and help them do it better. And and just be part of that whole movement. And it was so exciting so exciting and unplanned to see how much of that was happening here. And so eventually the economy picked back up and I was able to start working for architecture firms. And that was really the time when Passive House in the US started ramping up, becoming popular and sort of getting their stuff together. And when I saw that there was a training offered in Boston, I'm just like, hey, I'm just going to do this. I don't even know what I'm getting into. And that turned into a whole series of events where I'm now sort of specializing at that.
Which year was that?
It's 2015.
2015. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. It's amazing how year to year things progress in the sustainability world in terms of the certification systems and just what's available. So even though it was only 6 years ago, it feels like a century ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what softwares do you use for energy calculations?
Yeah, so I tend to use Passive House Institute US protocols, that does the sort of most of the certifying of passive houses in the United States and North America. I use WUFI. It's an acronym, WUFI, and it's all German words, so I'm not going to try to pronounce them. But it's developed by Fraunhofer, a software company in Germany, and in partnership with FIAS, the Passive House Institute US. There's which is used for certifying their projects. It's a really powerful tool, and it's powerful for certification. It's also super powerful for any projects. Like, say, I do a lot of work on my own architecture, but with other architects doing pretty good house projects, and it's also really great to use for that too. It can be unforgiving, but once you get your head around the software, there's no undo button. It can be a great way to kind of quickly understand the performance of the building and make recommendations for how to improve it. And what I like about it most is that you could really drill down, get as detailed as you want in a project. And while it takes time to do that, the fact that we can go that deep is really helpful in some projects.
It is. So tell us about the Pretty Good House. I heard a bit about it, but I want to hear more.
Yeah, so that's a term coined by Dan Colbert. He's a builder here in Portland. I think he gave a presentation at NESE 9 or so years ago. And the idea is, there are a couple different interpretations. The idea is to take sort of passive house principles, good building science principles, and apply them in a cost optimized way. Don't worry about certifications. Just have people who know what they're doing, build a building using the best practices that we've figured out over the course of, being conscientious builders and designers in the Northeast. So that affects health, that affects the mechanicals, the wall systems, the detailing, air sealing, all those things. And people who have kind of gone through, who understand some of the factors, I'll just call it passive house, but the suite of things that are involved in passive house should be able to build a pretty good house without needing certification. It's like passive house is the tip of the spear, and a pretty good house is like what we want everything following it to be.
Yes.
And it's really cool that in Maine, that's a concept that's been developed for the last 10-ish years by a whole group of builders and designers, and it's coming into its own. And I think some of the people who were originally part of the Pretty Good House movement here in Maine should be coming out with a book soon to describe projects.
I heard about that.
Talk about it more. Yeah. It's a great thing, and I'm finding more and more that's what clients want are pretty good houses, because it makes sense.
So Hans, you and I both share love or passion for communities, right? I think you do.
Yes.
So can you tell us how can we use passive house principles to develop pretty good communities?
Pretty good communities. Well, the first thing I jump to is projects of scale, right? So multifamily housing, affordable housing. Ultimately, what are what from Passive House can be applied to some of the most vulnerable, in a sense, which affordable housing can be a place for folks who are more susceptible to having poor life outcomes from having a bad, an unhealthy living environment. And Passive House principles tend to lead to much healthier buildings for the occupants. And to me, that in itself is enough to sort of justify making it so that more multifamily affordable housing projects can be built using these principles. And it's a win-win-win for everyone in those situations, as you and I'm sure some of your listeners are aware. It's actually really easy to do a passive house at large scale, in the sense that the things that you need to do that you might not do in just sort of a code minimum building aren't a whole lot more. Just a little more thinking. It may be a little bit more cost, but it's so low, it's almost a rounding error worth of increase in cost. So it could almost be, if you pencil it out, it could almost be no cost to do a passive house. But it provides, high quality indoor air, low condensation risk in the assemblies, which means less risk for mold growth in the building, which has a huge impact on human health. And some communities and states have really figured out ways to financially incentivize it too.
Yes.
Like I'm sure you're familiar with Mass Save, which is a great program in Massachusetts, where if a developer wants to do an affordable housing project, there is a financial incentive for passive house certification. That's very real and appreciable. And so I'd love to see more of that. And I'd love to see that happening again at kind of governmental programs, and incentives in that way, like it's happening in Massachusetts. I'm pushing for some of that in Maine, and we're getting some traction. And I think that'll help sort of open up any sort of log jam preventing us from doing that. So
Yeah, thank you. Awesome.
Yeah.
So Mass Save is excellent, and energy saving on the bills is excellent way, but how do we offer more incentives to, let's say, not the end user, the developers who are developing or partnering with the city?
Yeah. Well, Mass Save is a direct financial incentive for the developer. So that's often in the development world what an incentive looks like. But there are other avenues, I think, to make it easier. A nonprofit I've been involved in, passivhausMAINE, which looks to make passive house the minimum building standard in Maine, tries to connect people, on the team to information resources and others who've, kind of gone through that process, and kind of a very open source way of helping everyone see, like, it's actually not that difficult to do. It's a little bit of change. Maybe your first project's a little painful. There's some growing pains, but afterwards, I think those who I know who have done it, they don't go back. And then future projects will benefit from that experience. And then it's just the new normal. Keep stacking up. Yeah.
Excellent. Tell me about your experience in Newburyport green living in Newburyport.
Yeah.
So I think that was a community project, and you were involved in that.
Sure. Yeah. It's the Hillside Centre for Sustainability. Bit of a mouthful. It's a development project that's been going on for a number of years. The development and architecture team are building 5-ish buildings, which includes sort of townhouses, a couple of buildings made of connected townhouses, so multifamily, so they benefit from the shared walls. A Young Women's Christian Association, YWCA building, community building, and the whole premise is to have extremely low impact living. So it's a very sort of innovative project that's been going on for, I've been involved 5 or 6 years now, and I'm doing the sort of the passive house consulting on that project as a lead CPHC. And that's an amazing project because the developer is really interested in creating a replicable system. So they have this kind of wall panel, it's a sort of tilt-up composite concrete wall panel. They're building flat, and they want it to be this like super high performance passive house wall that they can sort of in the future just kind of produce on the level of manufacturing. And so we went through a few years, I would say, of back and forth of doing energy modeling on different variations and of these wall panels and these systems and how they might connect and different details and like really understanding how they perform. And just recently, the first building was pre-certified, which means that all the energy modeling work was accepted for certification, and now it just needs to be verified on site by a passive house rater, which is the other component. And I think that's just about done. So it's on track to being certified as passive house. The first building. There are other buildings under construction and future projects or future buildings there that will be certified. But yeah, it's a great project, and it's great to see someone just wanting to do the right thing and really putting forward effort on a development project and having the vision to see that there's also real benefit. It works out financially to sort of invest in this R&D and then kind of replicate that going forward. So I think that's kind of the real beauty of that project.
Wow. So that was going to be my question. What motivates the developer to do so, other than like passion? I'm sure most developers are probably they want to see profit and they want to see, but do they have the audience? There are people who want to live. Have you met with them? Have you heard?
Yeah, well, I think it's the mix of things. The one project I just talked about, there's a lot of passion from that end. So the development team includes architects who care about this already. Wow. So it's kind of a unique team there. And I think I've worked with some other developers on some mass save projects, and the clear financial incentive of like you get a certain amount of money per unit when you do sort of a feasibility energy model, and then you get a certain amount per unit once the project's certified. That's significant. That's a real draw. So I think those programs are incredibly powerful in that way. There's also, and this is what I'm kind of working with in Maine a little bit, is also trying to get people comfortable and familiar with what's involved. I think there's rightfully so, there's a little bit of fear and hesitancy that something that's an unknown, a project type that might be unknown, just means expensive, which it doesn't necessarily. So I think having good fact-based resources and education on what it means to build in this way and what the benefits are in a really concise, clear way is helpful for development teams, because they're playing this numbers game the whole time. I mean, there's a lot of flying around, and to add unknowns into their pro forma of passive house, they don't want to touch it, right? But if you can make this more of a known quantity in some way, then it's a little easier to get your head around it. There's a lot less hesitation to see it as an obstacle and really start to see it as an opportunity. Yeah. Right. So I'd love to see more of that conversation, more I say education and outreach just with everyone. So it's like, it's not that hard. You can do it. And it makes so much sense. Yeah. And you'll benefit from it. Yeah. So.
And you were also involved in a school project, right? A passive house school project.
Yeah, that's right. So I was the lead certified passive house consultant on the Maine Coast Waldorf High School project with a firm I worked with previously named Brightburn here in Portland. Great firm. They focus on sustainability. I learned a lot working with them. And I also worked on some of the architecture for that building. And it's the first passive house high school in the US. So it's really quite an achievement. And it's all owed to the Maine Coast Waldorf High School and their commitment and devotion to building sustainable buildings. I think one of their older buildings was one of the first sort of commercial straw bale insulated buildings. So they're very progressive and innovative, and really really pushed us to do as much as we could with that project. Um, but yeah, it was great to see, and it was surprisingly easy again to do a passive house at a larger scale than single family residential. If
Mm,
you think about it, and I'm sure you're aware, um, once the ratio of floor area to envelope area increases, as in
mm,
like the skin of the building is less relative to how much inside there is, then there's a lot of thermal inertia, just the people and the computers, the internal gains, the heat gains from that, and any sort of solar gain that comes to the windows, that tends to get held in the building. So it's extremely easy, to get a building that retains the energy you put into it, and so
mm,
they're just kind of naturally efficient. And the things that make it happen are investing in the envelope of the building: good windows, good air sealing, continuous insulation, minimize mechanical systems. um, I mean, it's just the passive house principle. So it really, um, we really, as a species, or as an industry, the whole passive house movement, it's really a wonderful thing that I hope, continues, because it's a science-based system that really, leads to good outcomes for people who are busy, and it's hard for designers to come up with this stuff on their own. So it's nice to be able to kind of take these set of things that if we do all these things well in our building, will result in a high performance healthy building. And so that's what we did, and I just hope to see more of them.
yeah. So this leads me to the next question about building envelope and windows. So a lot of people, including me, love windows, love a lot of sunlight, natural light, indoor
Mhm.
spaces, and that there's a kind of a conflict between um, saving energy, preserving the energy, and having these large windows and probably windows needs an envelope.
Yeah,
So how do we
yeah,
find that balance?
yeah. That's always an interesting topic. So I'm thinking of cold climates in particular, since we're up in the Northeast, but there are corollaries in other climates. Um, Generally, that's one of the strong passive house principles, is having high quality, high performing windows. So that often
Mm,
means triple glazed. It means that the frame on the windows are, very thermally broken, well insulated. Um, it also means if it's an operable, even if it's fixed window, that it's, good at air sealing, and that over time it will maintain its seal over time. So that leads to certain types of windows. And for a long time, most of the windows that could work from a passive house standpoint were coming from Europe. And we do have some, North American manufacturers now that can make windows that work for us. Um, that there is part of it, that part of using windows is creating an energy balance in the envelope, and part of that is how much solar heat gain you're getting through these windows to heat your building, because you kind of want to take care of that, take advantage of that. The sun is passive, it's always there. So how much energy we're getting eh, versus how much do we not want to get. So, one challenge I've ran into, in the number of projects, is, especially the larger projects, is actually overheating, because our buildings are so well insulated. The people inside it are warming it up easily enough that even a little bit of sunshine getting inside makes it almost uncomfortable. And so you have to use air conditioning in like late fall, which is kind of an odd thing. And so there can be a balance of how many windows do we have, and what's their orientation? Is there seasonal shading on them? Do we sort of have some clever, brise soleil or something like that? And that's where doing energy modeling really comes into play, because then becomes gaming what the different pieces are. And it could be gaming how much window area you have, and maybe it's a project where you want a lot of light. I mean, for good reason, you want access to light for experience of the space, and views. So what does that mean? We'll try literally modeling different shapes and processing through that the energy model, and like kind of procedurally come up with ways of seeing what mix of factors leads to a good result for the indoor comfort of the building. And some projects is challenging enough that you'll take a space and model that over and over again with different window configurations, different window performance values, like different solar heat gain coefficients for the glass, and then again different sort of sun shading, temporary shading potentially variations. And I think it's very cool that we have those tools as designers to say, like, hopefully we recognize initially, okay, this is a problem area we need to sort of figure out, and then we can take it and plug in these tools and then get a lot of good information that fortunately, because it's kind of comes from a standardized sort of certification world, we can have a lot more trust in the outputs we're getting as individuals using this software to model these spaces. So yeah, I think they're really powerful tools, and I encourage all designers to really to look at that and try to go for a fact-based analysis of our spaces, and not to be afraid of putting big windows. Just know they're going to have to be expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one question on that I have is, I never used these softwares, so I'm curious if it's easy for, let's say, like, Revit or Prius Max. Is it easy for clients to understand the shade, what's going on? Because let me tell you a story. I have a client who it's a bit of a difficult client, wanted a lot of sunlight in their house, and they have their main facade is on the north, and they covered the facade with a portico. They covered the window, above the windows, pretty large portico, and he was like, but you wanted sunlight, and we were okay, yeah, and he was like, you're blocking your sunlight.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're blocking your sunlight. And then they agreed on making it smaller, but I tried to explain. I sent them renderings showing them the shade and shadow, and we reached to a middle ground. But I'm wondering if how easy and my clients were not interested. We're not tech savvy. We're not interested in neither passive house, nor we're focused on really having really good sunlight in their house. They wanted it, but they would. So
yeah.
how do you communicate that to your clients?
Yeah. It's interesting. You got to know your audience. It's been a really different conversation, not just on project types, but from client to client for sure. And I'm sure you experienced this in your architectural practice, because different clients have very different interests in what their goals are in their project. One thing that comes to mind first, or a tool that energy modeling can be, it's like, well, what's the performance of your building if you change the depth or shading on the windows? That can be one thing. And depending on the building, that can be significant, and that can potentially sway them if they're interested in what the operational cost is for the building. But there's also, it can be modeled a little bit, but I also will talk to clients about comfort in a lot of these situations. What is the felt sense? What's it like? Do you want to sit next to a window and feel sunshine on you? Or use it for a view, or what's the motivator there? Because we can, it's a lot of drilling down, but it's possible to model that space and say, like, okay, through the course of the year, what's the I forget the average, I forget the term, but it's like the mean average of comfort. There's a psychrometric chart where it's like, they'll say, like, all right, these times of the year, it's going to be inside the comfort zone or outside of the comfort zone. And, we can start to model that. And I think, it then comes back to the questions like, well, what's your comfort level, client? Do you like feeling kind of cool in your house and you want to put on a sweater? Or do you want to feel really comfortable and wear like just shorts and hang out in your living room and feel, feel the sun on you? And I think that's part of the conversation, because we can make, with high performance building, you can make a situation work. Say say you have some glass, some windows, and your client really wants that portico, but the solar heat gain from those windows were going to be really great for the building in terms of energy performance. And it hurts the energy performance goals of the project by having that condition. Well, there are other dials to turn. And I think that's always a cool thing to think about with the building. It's like, if you turn the dial over here this way, you can turn this dial over here this way to make up for it. So in an energy model, we can include that condition of, say, the shaded windows, and then maybe we add a little more insulation in other places for the overall assembly. So we get sort of a net energetic goal of X, whatever we set for the project. And that's certainly the case in a passive house certification project, because we sort of were given the targets that we have to meet. And so we're sort of playing with the different factors to get there. And that's part of the fun, sort of that gaming of like, what little bits fit together to get to the energy goals of the project. But at the same time, you know, we have to be smart architects and think about, well, is this still comfortable in a nice space?
Yes.
for
Pretty good
our clients
house.
too. Yeah, pretty good house.
Pretty good
Exactly.
building.
Yeah.
Pretty good building. So what advice would you give to developers and city planners or community builders, like the development project you've been working on? If other developers want to follow their steps, what would you advise them? Where to start? Should they hire a special architect or someone who's a sustainability consultant like you? Work on their feasibility studies? What kind of advice do you want to give them?
For sure. If it's someone who's approaching this for the first time, a great thing would to be hire a sustainability consultant who's gone through this process and seen it from a lot of different angles before. And I've played that role, and consult with others who play that role for development teams who haven't done it before. And there's definitely a learning process, and that's sort of what a consultant who has that experience will be prepared to bring the whole team along to understand what the relevant pieces are and how to sort of maybe shift thinking a little bit on certain aspects of the building. That'd be a great first step, I think, the most efficient way of doing it, because ultimately your team needs to start to understand what some of these things are. If it's your first time, a consultant could really accelerate that. And then the next time, you probably want your consultant involved, but it's going to be a lot easier. Your team's going to know, like, okay, these are the set of things we need to focus on. Like, we need to be on top of air sealing on the site. You know, your people on the ground will sort of be more dexterous with that. So, you know, it just comes from learning and information and education and awareness. You know, that can come from participating in sort of conferences and events put on by different state passive house organizations. I think every state in New England has one. And that's a great resource to talk to others who have gone through this and to see what their experience has been, because it can be challenging. And we're fortunate, as I mentioned earlier, we're fortunate in Maine and New England that there's a lot of people who've been trying to do this for a long time, and they've stumbled, and now they know how to do it. And so it's a very open community where I think a lot of people who want to do this work want to share with others and share their experiences and give advice and things like that. So I would talk to others who have done it and continue to educate yourself as you can. And yeah, definitely bring a consultant on board if you have a project that you want to see benefit from this. Financially, it always pencils out as a win-win-win. So really isn't I don't see a hurdle to doing that. But yeah.
Well, thank you, Hans, for enlightening us. It's been a great interview, really. And I hope we probably have more, second interview or something like that.
For sure. Yes. Great chatting with you, Ezra.
Yeah. And to your viewers, goodbye. See you in another episode.